All right, great. We'll go ahead and get started here. So welcome everyone and thanks for joining us on this nice Sunday afternoon here in New England. A little bit different over the past couple of years. We're not in person again, but this is the best way to get the most amount of people together and works out for just about everyone, kind of fit it into their schedule, trims things down a little bit. So we're gonna get things started here. We'll slide in kind of the rough outline of the whole meeting here is we'll go through some of the annual meeting stuff that we typically have to do for NEBRA as a nonprofit. And that's kind of a review of the financials as well as kind of where we're heading and that sort of stuff. And then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the promoter summit meeting. And that's where we'll go over some of the trends and a bunch of the other stuff. But so starting with the NEBRA financials for 2022, we had 5,000, almost 6,000 in expenses. The majority of that went to grants as well as a bridge loan to help a promoter be able to put on a race. We also had our officials, assigners, thanks to Sean and Elisa Weigland for doing what they do to make sure races are well staffed and properly officiated and everything that goes on there. It's a tall task. And so thank you guys for doing that. Also some operational expenses, newsletter stuff, as well as just subscription to a few different things take up a part of that. But as you can see on the handy dandy graph over here, most of it goes to grants. And those grants are all available on our website to see what they actually are. We have an officials grant, which was the majority of our grant this past year to cover some of the associated costs to promoters with, actually, sorry, Sean. Dun, 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 dun. New setup. It's weird on the side. Okay. Everyone can see that now. There we go. Okay. Oh, now you guys are all messed up on my screen. Okay, good. Sweet. So you can see the majority of our funds went to grants because that's what kind of what a big part of what we're doing right now, especially in terms of with our financials. We do a lot of the stuff with organizing the calendar, assigning championships and all that stuff. But in terms of the actual financials and money coming through NEBRA, that's where it mostly goes. We want to help the promoters as best we can, as well as racers and all that. And so there are grant opportunities on our website, which you can look at. And the majority of them are like different things, but one of the big ones we pushed this year was to help out with promoters and the official shortage. So there was, with being short on officials and having to pull in crews from different areas, especially in New York. And I think Sean could maybe talk about exactly how much this happened, but we covered some of the travel costs related to those specific officials. And we'll get into some of the grant stuff later, but that's the majority of what this year's grant funding went to. And in terms of income, you can see it right there. We made a little bit more than we spent, which is great. And USAC accounted for about $6,374 of that. And that comes from the 20-cent per rider day funding that kicked back to us from our rider days and all the races that are USAC sanctioned. So like the more races we have that are USAC sanctioned, the better for us, the more we can provide in grants. And that's the majority of it. We also had a little bit come up from Amazon Smile, and the membership was around $200. The Amazon Smile was actually that 166 that you see there. And then the bridge loan repayment that is kind of marked in there is what went out as part of the grants as well. And so our bank account is sitting $2K higher than it was last year, right around $29K. Still have a lot kind of just sitting there, and we'll get into that and we'll go over kind of what we're hoping to do with it. And actually are still looking for income on the best way, or input on the best way we can help the promoters as well as bike racers and offering different sort of grants. So we'll get into some of that stuff here. But the good news is we have a little bit more money to invest back in the community and help promote bike racing in New England. So for 2023, we're going to keep things going. We're going to continue to do what we love, which is helping bike race promoters, officials, bike racers, and all things bike racing in New England, especially coming out of the pandemic, which is kind of just put things to like a weird standstill, as most of you know, with what's going on. And so the majority of what we're doing this past year and will continue to do is, like I mentioned earlier, Sean and Elisa Weigland doing the officials coordinating and making sure events go off without a hitch, and as well as calendar organizing, which the majority of that is focused around making sure promoters and the area can all kind of play nice together, and that we don't have any conflicts with events being right on top of each other that are close in location, as well as just like days in New England where there's like 3 or 4 bike races. Try to avoid that as much as possible. Obviously, there's only so many weekends in the year, and you can't host like a full day bike race during the week because people have real jobs and unfortunately don't race their bikes all the time. As much as we wish we could just, do that as a full-time gig and all the time, everything bike racing would be great. We also organize the championships and accept championship bids. We dole out grants and funding to help bike races that might not be able to make up for certain payments that are previous to actually collecting income, as well as we have meetings, including this one, and including board meetings which are monthly. Send out communications to race promoters and racers as well. All that stuff is still going to be us. And so how that all kind of breaks down is we get 20 cents per rider day from USAC, which is roughly about $5K a year. And it was a little bit more this year. And that is due to just more bike races and more participation. So the higher we can, the more races that we can have that are USAC sanctioned will kick back to us to be able to do that. And so this funding and our goal with that is just to provide as many grants as we can to kind of help the community. And that includes not just bike race promoters, but also our members and bike racers all around. So important note there is just remember to submit your post-event form payments. Those are crucial. You can avoid fees by doing it if you do it soon enough, so you're not waiting too long, which no one wants those. And it also allows us to provide grants. We actually get paid out per rider day based on what's submitted, not necessarily just what happened. So the longer you wait, the less likely it is to help money go back into the community. It's not just about us collecting money and holding on to it and like safeguarding it and running around with it, but to directly kind of help the community there. So a couple new things that are going to be awesome for 2023 is we're going to offer officials incentives. So I talked a little bit about the grants and kind of what we did to offset some of those costs, but instead, and that was helpful for sure, but we were looking at it as a way to kind of continue to like solve the problem instead of necessarily just throwing money at what the problem is for everybody. So I will touch on that more, as well as the 2023 road series, which for that is going to be, we did like a soft launch this past fall with the cyclocross series to kind of be able to work out any kinks, any issues, and it was really set the groundwork for us to be able to bring back the 2023 road series. And that's listed on our website, the format of it, but basically it's any race that's not a training race. Counts towards the series, all races in New England, and then there are overall categories broken down through different age groups, and there's a ton of different ones. And you get a jersey for the winner. Many of you probably remember this, some of you might not. That's why I'm giving it a little once over. And then also streamlining championship bids. How we've done it in the past has just been like an email sent out and people would send it to us with a certain format, and we're going to have some forms so it can kind of be submitted with more of a structure than just writing an email. You can fill out a form, makes it a little bit easier, makes it easier for us to see. And also one note on that too, is we will be adding some type of gravel championship option as well, just to add to the fun a little bit. So it's not just road, mountain, cyclocross. We'll add gravel as well to add a little fun to it. So in case anyone's wondering kind of what that looks like, that those primarily, they have to be USAC sanctioned as of right now, and will continue to be like that. And you just have to meet certain guidelines that we have posted on our website, and working on developing what that will actually look like for gravel championships, because that's something we haven't done in the past before. But the road outlines and all that stuff is already up on our website as well. And some fun housekeeping stuff is the board member elections. So I'll be continuing on Mike Rowell, Alan Atwood, and Caitlin Agnew. And the terms are 2 years, and so it basically rotates 7 total board members, 4 of them and then 3 of them go up for election on alternating years. And so Krista Hahn, who's a current board member, will be continuing on, will be running again, I should say, for re-election. And then we have 2 vacant seats. And big thanks to Alex Grabeau and Joe Rodriguez, who I don't believe are on this call right now. Actually, I think they are. Have reached their term limits. So they're going to be stepping down. So it does mean that we'll need 2 completely new board members to join in. And I know there are some questions about that, but I actually got an email about it. So thank you, Adam, for prompting some of this. Is something we wanted to include is like, okay, well, what does it actually mean to be a board member? And so our board member, quote unquote, job description, because it's not quite as formal enough to be its own actual job description, is participating in monthly calls, which are roughly like an hour, and being responsive by phone, email, and discussing occasional issues that need to be addressed in between those monthly calls. And the big one is, since this is not a full-time, we don't have a full-time employee anymore, and things have changed through that. It's continuing to work on NEBRA projects that benefit the community, such as grants, calendar organization, newsletter stuff, and a few other miscellaneous things. It's really not too labor intensive, and it's a great way to kind of give back to the community and help the overall New England bike racing scene. So if you're interested, you know anyone that's interested, we're going to be holding elections from February 6th to the 11th. And so you can submit your candidate statement anytime before then up to the 5th at midnight to board@nebra.us. And if you have any questions, we can go over those later in the Q&A section, or you can email us as well. So I said the voting period is not next week, but the following, and you got to be a registered member to vote. And so there's no reason really not to be a registered member, because if you're a promoter, which most of you on here are, or if you're you have a USA Cycling license and have promoted a race in the previous calendar year, it's free. Otherwise, it's only $25, so it's really not much. It's like maybe a week's worth of coffee, which I know is valuable to some people, but that's a little bit that gives back to what we do. And being a member also allows you to access grant funding. And so there's a lot of good reasons to support bike racing in New England. Okay, so before we jump into that too, that kind of wraps up some of our annual meeting stuff, the formal housekeeping items that we've got to touch on. And we will expand on some of this stuff a little bit later on. So we'll be transitioning over into the actual promoter summit now. So welcome, everyone. Welcome Chuck Hodge and Trish Black from USA Cycling. They were kind enough to take some time on their Sunday afternoon. It should be, what is it, 2:30 over there, to come join us. So I think where Trish is, it might even be earlier. So thanks for taking some time out, and everybody welcome them with a virtual round of applause here.
Brian, you want me to get started?
Sure. Yep.
Great. I'm going to need screen sharing capability if you don't mind.
Not a problem.
I'll run it for both Trish and myself.
Give me 1 sec here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick. Okay, Chuck, you should be good there.
I got it. Let me just get going here. Before I share, just want to say thanks for having us. I'm Chuck Hodge, Chief of Racing Events for USA Cycling, and Trish Black is joining me. She's going to have the sort of second half of the presentation. I'm going to go over a couple 3 items on my end, talk about the National Road Calendar work about putting together over the next month or 2. And then I'm going to dig into some new rules and really only give you the stuff that's pertinent. And as Brian put on his slide, the whole rule book's posted, and we'll be doing an officials update. So Brian, I assume you're going to let all these folks in since I'm a co-host. I'm getting the alerts now. People are in the waiting room. So, all right, with that, I'll and Trish is going to take over, go over some items of interest, I guess the best way to put it to you all is event organizers. So let me do a screen share. Talk a little bit about National Road Calendar we're putting together. So those of you who've been around a while may remember the Pro Road Tour, the PRT, or the old National Racing Calendar. About a year and a half ago, we started working with the NAPRD, the National Association of Professional Race Directors, and they asked for a little different format of national calendar. In the past, basically, we had a 10 to 20 race series based on your prize money, for lack of a better term, and carried that through as a series through the year. So we're going to change that up. I'm going to go over some details as some of you might be interested. First, we're looking at this as an annual calendar with a pretty wide diversity of criteria to be a part of it. It's no longer you got to have $10,000 a day. We're looking, and I'll go over this in a minute, a broader criteria of who is a part of this. Probably the biggest thing, and while we're rolling this out now, we're finishing up some details with NAPRD, is we're borrowing a little bit from the UCI and we're looking at a point system that is not going to be based on a year. So we used to, you got first place, you get X number of points, and that would be good for the series. We are going to change that up and have a rolling point structure for the national calendar. And as we build this out, this will mean different things for teams and riders. As an example, our professional championships, which will become an elite championship for road in the future, this will be a method for qualifying for that championship. We've gone away from the last few years of just having pro riders there and have opened it up to our domestic elite teams. Now that we are growing those domestic elite teams, we have a ton of Cat 1s and pros eligible, over 400 people. I really don't want to road race with 400 people. So we are going to use this as a bit of a qualification system, similar to the UCI does. And then to be a part of this in the future, if you are a part of it, you're obligated to invite those top teams. Doesn't mean you have to pay for them, just means you need to invite them to your event. So trying to make a value proposition for athletes and teams to participate in these events. A lot lower barrier to entry in the future. So prize money is not going to be all we're looking at. It's going to be much less expensive for races to be a part of this. And on the team side, it's just included for UCI and domestic elite teams to be a part of this. And again, a rolling calendar, 12-month block, and races will basically fall off and new races will go on. And we'll look at having individual as well as team scoring on this. So a little about what we're looking at for this. We've got a pretty simple application, takes about 15 minutes to fill out. And we're going to be looking at a lot of factors that are all weighted based on what we see as important. One is what we call logistics. You just have to have a good, well-produced, safe race. We don't want races that are not well run, and that's priority number one, has some heavy weighting to it. But getting away from prize money, and prize money is a consideration, but what's your marketing and promotion? Do you have live streaming at your event? What's your social media presence look like? Teams have consistently told us that having exposure for their sponsors is just as important as prize money. So something we're placing some emphasis on. History of the event. There's races, as we all know, that have been around for 50 years that anyone would love to win, but may not have the most prize money. That history is important to us as a sport. How you support the riders. Do you have a host housing program? Do you help bring people in, bring teams in? Again, something teams and individual riders have told us is important. And the last one I call community involvement. Are you running clinics? Are you doing school visits? Are you benefiting nonprofits? These are all things that go beyond just prize money, and how is that involved? So in the future, as we start to deploy this over the next year, we're also going to get the input from teams and our officials as well in regards to, should you remain on that calendar? So if you check all these boxes, but we get reports that the race was horrible, that's not good. And if you just squeaked in and we get feedback that you've got the best race on earth, that was better for next year. So those will be things we're looking at moving forward. If anybody's interested, I'm going to drop my email in chat. Feel free to ping me on this. And for a couple of weeks now, I've said it'll be about next week before we get this out. We are ready with it. I'm just waiting on some input from our race director working group on a couple of tweaks they want to make. And we will kick this out the door and get it going. So feel free to email me if you have it already. And if not, I will be happy to drop that again here in chat in just a few minutes. All right, I want to go on to some rules stuff. So a lot of little rule changes, a lot of typos and little fixes and UCI things that I am not going to bore you with. I'm going to go over probably the big things that are either applicable to you as event organizers or you're probably just interested in. So here we go. First, this is impactful to you all as race directors. So the rule has been that you're supposed to pay your race officials at the end of your race on race day. And what we have found, we have more and more groups and entities, including USA Cycling, who have to go through a process to properly pay and cut checks and get tax paperwork and all that good stuff. So in speaking with our technical commission, we've worked up what we feel is a fair in between. So if fees, per diems, and expenses with receipts are submitted by race day, those need to be paid on race days in the past. If there's any overtime, additional expenses that you need receipts for, you do have 10 days from submission of those to send those in. Overtime, if you're cutting checks, and you can include the overtime, or you can include the expenses day of, that's great. But an example, we've had people come to our national championships and they have to get home and get the parking receipt from the airport, and we can't, as an organization, pay until we get that receipt. So, and there are several other groups out there like us. So what we try to do is work that in, and on behalf of our officials, to put a timeline on that so that items are paid in a reasonable amount of time. For your chief officials, you should really ask them for what those fees, per diems are going to be up front, so you can be ready as an organizer to cut a check. Okay, moving on, handlebars. So the big one here is the rider position. So we have followed the UCI rule. A lot of you have seen this. It was just a fine issued at Tour San Juan, I think yesterday, for improper position. Riders have to use what the rules say is butt on the seat and hands on the bars, unless you're reaching down for bottles and stuff and the pedals. So what we're getting away from is just that those fake aero bars where you're resting your elbows on the handlebars and have your hands dangling out in midair, and the super tuck position. Those will all be items. I'll get into the penalties for those here in a little bit. Another big one is junior gears on road have gone away for all ages and groups, and we've tried to we've been shouting this out quite a bit. But as a road organizer, you do not, your officials and you don't have to worry about rollout anymore. That is all gone. And again, the UCI has done this as well. So you won't see this internationally. So it should make logistics a little easier. We've got a few other items we put in here. One is rider's uniform. We've actually received quite a few complaints over the last few years about people putting things on jerseys that we use the term damage the image of cycling, but are basically things you would look at and don't want on there. And I'll not use any of the derogatory terms, but it's a sort of a note when you see it. Bonnie is going to be speaking with our officials about how to work with this, but this is something that can be passed on to USA Cycling as well, and we'll be able to take some action on. All right, make sure yep. So a few other things with road. Another is the inflatable arches. We are following again the UCI here with not allowing those over, I'll call it active raceway, using one for a start line, using one on the side of the road, using one going into your festival is all fine. There have been multiple issues with inflatables falling, including in a race I was at where the arch fell with 1K to go. Not a good thing. Race barely made it through and all the team cars got stopped. So we are moving away from that. UCI it did the same a couple of years ago. And I'll just tell you, I had a race this summer in South America or Central America. I was working as a commissaire and had a real issue one day with an arch I didn't know was going to be there, and caused some big issues. Use of sidewalks, paths, and cycle paths. You all have probably seen this from things like the Spring Classics. If you've got a feature that's a part of your course, that's different, but this is for people jumping off of a road, for example, and riding up the sidewalk and back onto the road. It's not allowed. And I covered that position on the bicycle before. It's not going to be allowed moving forward. A few other things for stage races. Again, following UCI, we've allowed some increases in intermediate sprints and full stage time bonuses. So Gary, this may impact you. I think you've got maybe some time bonuses. Not sure who else would. For cyclocross, we have tried to clean up, sort of we call the early bell. This is an effort to have riders who are going to be, we know they're going to be pulled early, to be given a bell, especially if they're in a group, instead of just being pulled unknowingly as they come through. So let you all read through that in the regulations if you'd like. And just some things in discipline we put in. I've covered some of these. We were missing some items for some reason. They got cut at some point in the editing process, but these bottom ones are, we think, pretty important to put back in. The ones that impact you are failure to respect instructions of commissaires or race administration. So if you, for instance, tell people not to park on the road in the feed zone and they do, there are some ramifications to that now in the rule book, and that had disappeared. The unsportsmanlike conduct is obviously super important. The non-competitor on course during a race, for instance, you got someone warming up on a crit course while a race is going on, is again prohibited. And my favorite, the 8HD, other activity or actions not specifically covered by the rules that bring discredit to the sport. That's the one we use to nail people for stuff they shouldn't be doing that's not laid out specifically in the rule book. So before I move on, any questions? Sorry.
Quick question. Why are those penalties just under collegiate? It sounds like they would apply, they should apply to every race.
Yeah, they're actually in. So they were left out, I think, of collegiate. That may be a typo that Bonnie gave me. They are in everything now. So we had edited out mistakenly a couple of these a couple of years ago, but those are applicable to all parts of the sport now. And I think they actually, the reason it's in here is we moved them into collegiate this year. But we went to penalize someone for unsportsmanlike conduct as an example, and figured out it had accidentally been edited out of the rule book. So it was just a grammatical type thing. It's back in. Any questions? Good catch. Thanks. I'll delete that collegiate out because it applies for everything. So that was my copy and paste from someone else's. I'm going to drop my email in chat right now. And if you have any questions on the rules, send them to Bonnie at officials@usacycling.org. If you don't know, Bonnie Walker is our technical director, and I'm filling in for her. She had a Southern California webinar yesterday, so I got my friends at Nebra today. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Trish. Trish, I'll run this for you. Oh, last slide. This is where you can find the rule book. Just something to keep in mind, all of our policies are available as well from our rules and policies page. And I'm doing this from memory, but if you go to usacycling.org and scroll to the bottom, there's a rules and policies link, and it takes you to all the policies, the code of conduct, everything else you need to know that may not be in the specific regulations. There's a link to that from the rule book as well. All right, and Bonnie, or sorry, I was looking at Bonnie's name, Trish. I'll turn this over to you.
Hey everyone, I'm Trish Black, and my team is the one that you probably interact most with regarding your permitting. Matt Waite, who is your regional manager, is always available for those odd questions and phone calls, and he's a good source for any help that you might need with your events. Liz Reardon and Grace Moyer are the ones who are answering the phones and answering your emails when it comes to your permit questions. So with that said, I'll jump into what I've wanted to get in front of you today, in case you didn't receive an email, was the schedule of fees and the slight changes that have taken place for 2023. Chuck, do you have? Yeah, there you go. I sent an email to all of the race directors. It was about 900 people across the country. So hopefully you received that message, and this is just reiterating what was in that message, kind of highlighting the big changes in the fees. Schedule of fees is available on our website, so you can see all of them there. These are the big ones. The membership fees don't affect you directly, other than the one-day license fees. Those have gone up from $10 to $15 for the beginner, and the experience have stayed the same at $25. I'm starting to see this a lot on race permits that we're getting, and be sure to update that when if you have that one-day license fee on your race flyers. The organizer fees for permitting, we've taken a slight increase on the per day permit fee, went from $125 to $135. We've actually brought down the fee for track. You don't have a velodrome in your area, so doesn't really pertain to anybody here on this call. Mountain bike permit fees, we did start charging for those this year. They have been free for the last several years, and we realize that that's a big transition to go from $0 to $135. And so Matt Waite can work with you on finding maybe some options for that, but he's the one that you'll want to get in contact with about your mountain bike races. Series fees we eliminated, and the rider per day surcharge went from $5.05 to $5.30. Additional certs went up, just nominal, along with the hired non-owned autos. And regarding the series fee and the rider per day surcharge fee, we've given you our best price, basically. We had to find ways to cover our costs on the insurance, and instead of, basically, we tried to simplify it a little bit. The discount that used to be available for the event incentives that brought that rider per day surcharge down 20 cents, that went away. And if we hadn't eliminated that, your rider per day surcharge would have gone up even more. So $5.30 is our best price, and series fee was eliminated. Are there any questions I can answer on any of the fees?
Trish, actually, one came in on the chat. So it's just a good one. So the road training race fees, like if you have a multi-day training race, how does that permit fee kind of work out? I think it'd been like $25 per day before, or 50, or.
Actually, the training in the clinics were $125 per day, and we brought those down to $50 per day. But what you might be referring to is if it was a series, it was $25, and we've eliminated that series fee. So it's $50 a day if it's a training or a clinic or a camp.
Gotcha. I mean, if it's a like training race, so it's technically a race, is that, just for clarity, does that mean that it's like 135 per day then?
So training and race are the operative words there. If it's a training ride and there's no officials, no licenses, no results, then that's $50 a day. If it's
Gotcha.
really a race and there's officials and licenses and results, it's $135 a day.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Any other questions, sir?
We'll talk about what we're trying to do for events promotion a little bit here. Aside from Nebra has their calendar and USA Cycling has our calendar, and we are trying to make some enhancements to our calendar listings. So searching and filtering will be a little bit easier, but that's going to be a little bit of a project for this year. But when you permit with us, clearly you're on the Nebra calendar, you're on the USA Cycling Event Finder. We're also trying to launch a program that, well, we're not trying to, we will launch a program this year for event promotion for race directors. And so I don't have the details of this yet, but it will involve some paid social media, some geo-targeted emails, and these will be things that will be available to any race or event across the country. Some of these will have nominal fees, but our intent is to have almost like a plug and play where you're able to put in your links, your websites, your logos, your registration pages, all of that. And it'll be something simple that you'll be able to do on your own, and then we'll be able to market that information for you. So stand by for more details on that program. As I said, I don't have too much information right now, but know that it is something coming soon. And then just a few things for all of you here on the call, because you are event organizers. Some of the things that you'll see, we started a project at the end of last year, maybe Q3 of last year, kind of refreshing our website. And you'll notice that some of the links and menu items are moving around a little bit. And this is a continuing project that's going to happen throughout all of 2023, where we know that it can be kind of a tangled web, and we are working on making that simpler and easier for everybody to use. We did launch a new clubs and teams platform at, I guess it was Q4 around November. It's something that we're still working on, some of the bugs and enhancements for that program. But I'm sure a lot of you have already noticed that as club renewals have started to take place already in January. Officials download. I'm sure you are all aware of where this is, but when you're logged into your account and you go to the RD Officials tools, you will see the race director download. This is where you should be getting it from. I realize that some of you still might have a link to the legacy site, and that database has known issues with it, and it will be going away. So you should get used to going to the race director tools when you're logged into your account, and going to the race director download from this link. We are planning on sunsetting the whole legacy system. I think the only thing that is really still maintained on the legacy system is the results and rankings program. That's going to be another huge project for us in 2023. The big thing is to stabilize that on a new platform, and then we will be working on enhancements to it and better functionality. Are there any questions on anything about systems, website? Okay. Brian, one thing that I just wanted to bring up to you, because earlier in your presentation, you talked about the rider rebate that we send to all of the LAs. 2023 is actually twice the amount that you had on your slide that you presented. So it's 40 cents next year. And this is something that Brendan Quirk said early on in 2022 that he was going to try to do more funding for the LAs. And we are indeed stepping up and doubling the amount that we provided the LAs in 2022.
That's great. That's awesome news.
Yeah, it sure is.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you taking the time. Welcome to stick on to and go through some of this stuff as well. I know you hop on these calls a lot, so no pressure either way, but seriously, thank you for taking your time and going through all that
Brian,
stuff.
and I'm going to have to jump off, but if you can send the link of the recording, I'd like to share it with staff. Brendan is getting ready to go to Europe for Cyclocross World, so couldn't be on, but happy to pass on anything to him. And just to follow up one item, Trish, before we jump off, is I think what you will see, and Trish alluded to it, we're going to be doing a little bit of a reorganization internally. Something for you all as event organizers to be aware of is our new chief marketing officer, Erica, has been with us a year, came from figure skating. She and Brendan have really keyed on events, and specifically more, you know, what we'll call grassroots events, as very key to the success of the organization. Something I think Trish and I have been saying for years. It's great to have other parts of the organization really seeing that. So, you know, Trish is not going to promise something now that we're not going to deliver on, but I think you will see some real increased marketing attempts to work with organizers to get some folks at your event. So really super glad to see that happening, instead of us just going out and try to sell licenses, supporting events that's going to be what grows us. So.
For sure, that's all great stuff coming down the pipeline.
And feel
Exciting.
free to reach out. I'll put my email in chat, and Trish, you probably want to drop yours in there, and we can ever help, let us know.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. Actually, one thing to note as well is this might be kind of different. This is more for promoters, but it might be different than other LAs. So the post-event forms that we're also familiar with, those are to be filled out by the chief referee and not by the race director. And so they'll be filled out and submitted by the chief ref, and then you'll get a notification that lets you know once it's been submitted and what the payment is and all that kind of stuff. So just in case you've been kind of sneaking by with being able to submit it yourself, that's one thing that's just we want to send out a reminder about. So, well, with that, we'll share my screen again here, and we'll keep on moving. Anyone have any last minute questions here? Oh, all right. Great. Well, thanks, Trish. Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it. Okay. So I'm gonna do my best to monitor the chat here for the rest of the meeting here. If you have any questions, try to throw them in there. And I will do my best at getting back to them and bringing them up. Or feel free to unmute yourself at any point and just kind of ask questions about what's going on. So you're looking at right now, and everyone can see this, right? Because last time I started it, I didn't share it. So I'm not just talking to the group and making you all imagine. So these are the entries, all entries in New England for any event that uses bike reg, but it doesn't include like day of unless they're using the live reg function and that sort of stuff. But as you can see, like the trends for the most part are still growing even from last year as well, with the exception of mountain bike season, but of mountain bikes, I should say, mountain bike races or fat bike races. And cyclocross, if you look at it, which is the blue line there, kind of leveled out in terms of, if you ignore 2020, which is kind of tough here with the weird blip and what's going on, it somewhat leveled out to where it was in 2019. And so it stayed pretty straight there. And that's potentially with like 2021 being a little bit lower. I think having nationals in New England kind of helped revive some of those races. People were really excited, and they were like excited to give their community this chance to race. So you saw a couple of races that might not have happened in the last couple of years coming back, as well as promoters putting on, instead of one races, they were putting on an extra race and that sort of stuff. Some other training series that popped up as well. If you're looking at the overall sort of trends there's a clear shift in participation to like recreational style fondo, which we know has kind of been happening. Everyone's been talking like gravel. And it's interesting. It's not just necessarily about gravel, but it's kind of the idea around this like 5K marathon style event where it's the mullet mentality, where it's business in the front, party in the back. People like that, like exclusivity. I mean, and it seems to be kind of reported here, and I'm making some assumptions, but you can see where that is part of it. And it's still a style of racing, it's just a little bit different. So it's something to think about and consider. And if you're event has been run the same way, kind of maybe making some subtle changes that would be more appealing to that market segment, as well as just the hardcore race your brains out for an hour or 2 hours and see what happens. But it's an interesting trend to kind of look at. But the good news is it seems to be kind of returning back to the typical trends that it was following, which is still a little bit of a decline, but overall pretty good. Rec is the only one that actually increased itself. The biggest hit was mountain biking, as you can kind of see in the numbers below there. So, and thanks to Colin at Bike Reg, everyone knows Colin from this area, so he was able to kind of keep preparing these for us. So thank you to him. All right, and we know overall that road events were kind of hit the hardest, especially during the pandemic. And the good news is like it's still rebounding a little bit. And so in 2019, well, in 2021, there was only 36% of those races that happened in 2019. So a lot went away during the pandemic. And some of them have returned again back here in 2022, almost doubling up to 67%. But it still does mean that a good chunk of them, 1/3, is they haven't come back yet. But this doesn't account for like some of the new races that have popped up. And the events that did come back saw an average of almost 90% in the 2019 turnout, which is interesting. And this is specifically just for road, but it means that the scene is still continuing in that downward trend of road race specific stuff. And it can make some assumptions there, but people know that like the rising cost of what it's like to put on a road race continues and keeps kind of pushing out that traditional road race style where it's not a circuit race or crit race or something kind of in a confined area, but it's out on the road. And that's the police costs that continue to rise and the USA Cycling Motos costs as well. It's just the moving target and like the infrastructure around a race to happen is obviously expensive and continues to sort of go up. And there's ways to combat it, but that's the trend there. So notable outliers, obviously the two big stage races. Thanks to Gary for keeping those going for so long. KSR and GMSR roughly matched their 2019 numbers. So kudos to you, Gary, for continuing those on. Those are a big effort, but people seem to love them. And we had 3 new events: Loudon, Thompson, and Devons. And the thing about those two is kind of I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but those were all circuit or like enclosed racetrack style events. So the cost and maybe put those on is a little bit cheaper than a road race itself. And so they were able to kind of like maximize on that thing and bring back that style of event. So that could be the potential future of road racing. That style of races here. Does anyone have any sort of questions? Great, okay. All right, so cyclocross, from the CX events that existed in 2019, we had 2/3 of them posted results in 2021, and that declined to 58% in 2022, but some of that is offset by the new events that happened. We know Treehouse CX was a huge event, as well as Frostburg and the Pan American Games coming to New England. It was awesome to be able to add that to one of the UCI events. Was great. I was there. It was a phenomenal day of racing and a lot of fun for everybody. So that was a big addition to the New England calendar, including nationals as well. And so events from 2019 actually had a little bit more than 100% of their, events from 2019 had, a little over 100% in 2022. But that's like kind of result of like fewer events, but the same turnout or a little bit more turnout. So the scene is still there and there's just fewer events. So that's good for people that are continuing to put on events. The calendar itself is really heavy in October. So I can consider maybe moving your events sometime in potentially September. We had that as an open date, or a little bit later on, like late November or December. would be kind of where the holes are in the calendar. So definitely consider that unless you're historically sort of been on that October date. And the double days, which were all Sundays in October, because who doesn't love putting on a bike race in October with the, especially in New England with the fall foliage and the beautiful temperatures and all the great weather. So it's obvious everyone wants to do that. And that's all good as long as they're not too close. So like consider submitting your dates kind of early so we can get ahead of those double dates and figure out what's going on and there's not two races on top of each other sort of in the area. Got a good handle on that, but just as you develop your dates for our cross season, let us know. You got a calendar team that works on sorting that stuff out. Okay, so moving on to official stuff here. So if you look across these trends, you can see that on the left side, it's all 2022. We went all the way back to 2017 with no real data for 2020 because there just weren't that many races that happened. And looking at this, you can see that the overall numbers of officials has like drastically decreased since 2017, but it's increased a little bit since last year. So taking it with a grain of salt, that's a good addition to add one more person to it. And we also kind of activated some of those dormant officials. And so we're able to get an additional 4 officials that worked throughout the whole region. And you can kind of looking at the percent of working officials, it's obviously increased a ton, but that's just because the overall pool has kind of gone down. So let's see, where is this going on there? That's another notable stat. So if we move back past the number of officials that didn't work, that's kind of remained somewhat stable over the last couple of years, but with having less officials because we just gained more with jumping in. One of them was a brand new official. The other 3 were just some that had licenses that started working again. So the number of like races that were understaffed, which is a part of that official shortage that we talked about, and as a result of that, not having as many officials means that the crews are leaner and it's a little bit tougher to make them happen, especially with COVID coming in and kind of knocking some officials out last minute. It makes it an additional struggle for Sean and Elisa to make sure that they're staffed up to sort of the standards that we have. And luckily it hasn't gone up too much and stayed sort of around there, but it's still a problem and it's kind of something we're gonna talk about how we would try to fix. And the motor crews were definitely smaller, which means more travel distance, more expenses for promoters, and honestly more fatigue on the officials being called on. So the number of officials working 5 races or more has more of a correlation with I think the lowering number of traditional road races that call on those type of moto officials versus crits who don't necessarily have as many. They only have 1 or 2, and they're generally kind of in that working area. I don't know, Sean, if you have anything you'd like to add to this.
Yeah, sure. Mostly it's really just that, we have the numbers are what you see, but in that it's just a challenge every time to make sure that we have enough folks available to work the particular races and the skill sets that are needed for those races. Anything that folks can do to help, and I think Brian's going to talk about incentives for getting club officials and things like that, certainly is going to help the situation. Especially with the pandemic, we lost a lot of officials that, found other things to do with their weekends and decided that they were, going to do that going forward. That's something that it's just a byproduct of, not having a year and a half with as many races. Nothing against those folks. They decided that, this is something else they want to do. It's just how it is. Continuing to staff races as best we can. There are certain types of races that, of course, require more officials and more motor officials and things like that for periods of time. The stage races are a challenge, but we do whatever we can, and Gary works with us very well to help us come up with solutions and ways to do it. So certainly, we're happy to work with promoters. Probably the biggest thing from this perspective is is, and I'll drop this in the chat. If you have a question, a comment, you know, a request of any kind, you know, please get us that request before we send you the thing saying, hey, your crew is assigned. We're going to do everything that we can to try to make sure that we're covering what we need to cover based on the information that we have for size of fields and numbers of fields and waves of fields if it's a road race, that kind of thing. But if you have any input or questions, concerns, whatever, please just drop an email and then we'll start a conversation. You know, it's a little bit difficult for us when we're doing the assignments to reach out to every single race director. You know, that's really the chief referee's job once we assign that person to work, you know, out the details of that. And we do our best to adjust year to year, given that, you know, event sizes might be different and so on and so forth. But, you know, let's work together ahead of time the best that we can to make sure that we don't get in a situation where, you know, if numbers are low, we're getting requests to cut a number of officials and things like that when, you know, you still have the same number of fields kinds of thing. So that's probably the biggest thing. If you have folks in your clubs or in your organizations that want to become officials, you know, we'd love to work with them and help them through that process of doing it, and work them into the rotation, you know, whether it's at one of your events or, you know, hopefully your events and other events, because we need folks to work all the races in New England every season. And we've got a smaller number, the pool is smaller to choose from, and that puts a lot of strain on those that are willing to, you know, and available to do that. So that's probably what I have for now. Thanks.
Right, thanks. Yeah, and if we don't have any officials, we can't really have races. That's a big challenge. And so we want to make sure that we're helping Sean out here, as well as just the overall community, and that helps, in turn, that helps promoters. It helps lower the cost, and maybe even some of your club officials might consider like donating their time to your race, and so you don't even have to pay for that extra official, but you might have something along that line. So of course, you never want to just say, well, you're part of the club, so we're not going to pay you, but they could potentially offer that to you. So there's some benefits to that, and actually that sets the groundwork perfectly for the officials incentive program. And so, I mean, it's pretty simple. It's not like anything too crazy or nuts going on. Obviously, like we said, less officials means higher expenses for the race promoters and more fatigued officials. And that's not what we want. So one thing we've developed is we're gonna kind of play off of USA Cycling's covering officials for club members who become a new officials. If you've got a member that wants to try officiating, USA Cycling will cover that $25 cost of a new license for them. And so that's for the first year, and that gets that barrier to entry a little bit lower for them, so don't necessarily have to pay money into it. And how we want to extend that to make it something that's more sustainable and gives people more of a reason to do it is we're going to extend that 2 more years and cover the same C officials license fee, which will raise up to $60 after that first year. And so we'll cover that for 2 more years, making a total of 3 years where they don't even have to pay anything. They can get that experience, and it's really sort of a no-brainer. A lot of clubs that have maybe parents or other members that might not even just race, but are like spouses or family members, or that are always sort of at those races and helping out with a lot of things, is another great way that they could help out and potentially make some money off of it. And even if you are paying them, it still saves you money because you're not necessarily paying for a crazy amount of travel if they live closer. And that's one of the biggest expenses that comes with having this official shortage, where you've got to send a C official or someone that lives up in Boston all the way down or over to the other side of Massachusetts, or even up to New Hampshire or Vermont, and that sort of thing, where there's multiple races going on that weekend or whatever the case may be, to why there is that. It's not even just the number of officials, it's also the number of events continuing to go on. So if they work 3 or more races during the year, including one race that's ideally not a club race, we will reimburse them for their license fee. So summary, in short, let's recruit some more officials through your club, and they'll save you some money, and we'll help them by paying them and reimbursing them for their license as well. anyone have any sort of questions on this? We'll kind of finish working out the details for it and roll it out and make sure you guys have all the information, but any questions going on here? Yep, good point, Tony. The club member cannot be the chief ref for the event, but they can be one of those supporting events. So if you have a race that has a chief ref, chief judge, assistant ref, all that sort of stuff, they can be some of those other positions, but it's obviously a conflict of interest for them to be the chief ref because they are also a member of the club. So Chris, can you expand upon that? Is it a numbers problem question? If you're in here, you want to unmute yourself and hop on if you got a chance.
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yep.
No, all I was saying was you had the chart up a couple slides ago. Look 3 or 4 years ago. We're basically cut in half. That's what I mean by a numbers problem. It's not a discipline issue. So far as road versus CX, it's just simply a numbers problem. We're not feeding the new officials pipeline. That's the issue.
Yep, absolutely. So we're trying to kind of find the best way to do it, because not everyone who's just like a random person walking around the street is just going to decide, hey, I want to officiate bike racing. So trying to like work the plan of least resistance there and what kind of makes the most sense for people. What makes the most sense for the sport here. Okay. No more questions. Anyone got any questions they want to chime in on here? Unmute yourself, hop in, throw it in the chat before I move on. Okay. All right. So this is a good one. This is one of my favorite slides here. This is the trends, the USAC sanctioning trends by discipline, and this is like basically from the pool of overall races that are going on in the area. And this is a grain of salt. This is something that Colin mentioned last time. Is that prior to 2019, there wasn't really a downside of listing a permit number because you didn't have the online waiver function. So people kind of chose if they could or didn't. And I think for the most part, people did, but it wasn't necessarily something that was always listed. Some of the real trends here is USA Cycling did make a lot of progress in the gravel insurance game. So it's another reason to kind of promote with them with the safety and all that sort of stuff. And it seems to kind of have stalled out recently with stuff going on, but that's something to keep an eye on and how that changes as safety topics come up and people kind of continue to reevaluate how gravel races are put on. So USAC sanctioned mountain bike racing is now limited to Connecticut, and actually kind of curious on some thoughts here on how much licenses are a barrier to that and what people think around that. I personally have my own personal opinions, but I'm curious as to what people might think that have experienced this in racing, or maybe someone that doesn't put on a USAC sanctioned mountain bike race might want to chime in. Just cheaper. Those are the good points. So either you guys want to maybe expand on that, like in terms of just
Brian, I just unmuted myself. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I don't think of myself as the expert here in the mountain bike side, but I have been trying to pay attention to it, and I've been asking people. One of the athletes that I coach is involved in organizing the series now, and all of it's EFTA. And so I really wanted to understand, like, what are they offering that USA Cycling isn't, or why would someone choose that? And part of it's cultural. EFTA's been doing a great job for a long time, and people perceive that insurance as sufficient and you don't need a license. And I think the permitting's cheaper, the insurance is cheaper. And so there's just not a real, I don't think any of the organizers see that there's any incentive to going with USA Cycling if there isn't a better product there, or the product isn't worth paying more for. That's just, I guess, what I've been able to gather when I've asked about it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Matt, you chimed in on the chat. You have any chance you want to chime in by hopping into the meeting? Just trying to get some feedback on this and how we can try to help improve and promote that. I think I've actually heard some interesting feedback to Adam. Like, this is slightly different than what you've heard. Is like, I've had a mountain bike participant asking about like, hey, like, why aren't there more USAC sanctioned races? Like, we want points for the nationals, the national championships. And it's definitely important to a lot of people. And so that might be a reason to promote. And if it's not just for like your own benefit in that, but the benefit of the racers and wanting to do that, maybe might be worth putting a
think-
survey out.
I think you can compare that take to cyclocross in places like Washington State and Oregon, where they don't have a lot of USA cycling events in those regions, but they do have riders that are looking to race outside of the region, particularly at nationals, and that becomes important. And so USA Cycling has been reaching out to those regions and those organizers and doing these sort of points reciprocation plans, like sort of, it's a tough spot for them, right? Because you can't let them run unsanctioned races and then include those races in points for staging, because then there's just no incentive for them to become part of the bigger system. So Chuck's been reaching out and making deals and trying to meet them sort of halfway on things in hopes that then they will do some USA Cycling sanctioning. And it looks like that's working, where they're doing like, they're going from like no events to 2 or 4 to try to make that work. And I wonder, I'm not sure where Mountain Bike Nationals is going to be. I keep hearing that it's going to be at Killington. And so if that turns out to be the case, maybe there will be some incentive to make deals like that.
Right. I think, and I know you can't speak to the location of it, Trish, but there is the idea that they're separating gravity and endurance mountain bike nationals.
Yeah, they want to try to separate them so that one is on one weekend and the other one is on the other weekend, and then they would kind of meet in the middle. I don't even know if that means that they're at separate venues or if they're at the same venue, just split up a little bit. And I can tell you that we're getting ready to announce the location of Mountain Bike Nationals real soon, but probably
That's great.
I'm hoping it's next week. Yeah.
Yeah, and so hearing some of the feedback too, where Matt mentions here, he said you get a lot of racer hate mail from USAC not posting results and points in Colorado for upgrades. Like, how can you guys help us help them sort of work that stuff out, so it's maybe less of a barrier for someone to want to promote? I mean, I'm assuming like naturally that stuff is sort of improved, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah,
this
I saw
seems
this
like a
comment.
long-standing thing.
I saw this comment and I was a little confused by that. Do you mean the results from a USA Cycling sanctioned mountain bike race weren't posted? Because that's technically up to the race director, although we actually post results all the time when race directors struggle with that process. Or are you asking for non-sanctioned results to be uploaded and submitted to our results and rankings?
I think.
Now,
Sorry, Matt, say that again.
I was a very loyal USAC promoter, and then it just got to the point where it was too much trouble, especially with the points thing. I was providing the information, it wasn't getting posted. I got people complaining to me, and I couldn't even connect them to the officials involved in the race. So I think there needs to be more connection between the officials, the racers, and Colorado. So I'm a grassroots race. It doesn't affect New England that much, but those are the problems I had at a small level. And so I gave up on it, and it's probably not going to affect the New England scene that much, but that's the trouble that I had. So you have, I think with your EFTA series, you have a lot of small grassroots races, and it's just not worth a small promoter's trouble sometimes to pay that extra cost or have the extra layers that you have to go through to have a sanctioned event. I know a lot of them still do it, or at least they used to, and I hung on for a long time, but I've had a lot less headaches ever since I've gone unsanctioned.
It's interesting. I wonder if it seems like something that Adam mentioned earlier of like the longstanding culture stuff around it and how that's been for a while. How long ago were you sanctioned, Matt?
I started in 2008, I think, and I was sanctioned all the way up until about 3 years ago. And then I even have other smaller problems where there's a heavy burden to sell one-day licenses and extra paperwork there. And then there were things like, I would give a check to an official, and one time one of the officials lost the check. So I had to like reissue another check for some race fees. So they're all small little problems, and I would have liked to stay loyal to USAC. But to be honest with you, for me, it's just not worth it. I get a range between 100 and 300 racers every year, and I've had the same course, so it's kind of like a tradition. So for me, it's just cutting out the middleman.
Gotcha. Yep. It's interesting. Yeah, I think
It's
Sorry, just go
Brian,
ahead.
yeah, Brian, it's all good feedback and I appreciate hearing it. And I hear you. And I won't go into, responding to each of those, but we've got to start somewhere, and we do want to start turning the tide, so to speak, on mountain bike races and doing what we can to support them.
Well, I'm happy where I'm at, and I want to see more people do USAC. But those suggestions there, I've gone on the USAC website several times just to figure out certain things like what time nationals is. It's not always easy to navigate. I think if you can make a better connection between who officiated the race that day and the racer, I think it would take a lot of burden off the promoters from getting that kind of hate mail. And if it turns out that the promoter is not providing the information to be posted in Colorado, then so be it. But it becomes a one-sided argument because it's the racer and the promoter, and then it's kind of like a bureaucracy for USAC. And my information is about 3 years old, and there's probably been some improvements just before COVID, and maybe improvements on the website now. But I don't picture myself going back just because I'm a small race. But I would think I'm a one-man show and have a couple of friends that help me. But if it was a bigger race, I think it would, if you could make it easier for the promoter, I think you'd have better results.
Yep. Thanks for that. That's helpful feedback. And I see some value in it. Some of the races that I've promoted have all the mountain bike races I've promoted have been USAC sanctioned. And I understand some of the issues. I think that's with some of those kind of reciprocate with any sort of additional sanctioning. And I haven't sanctioned with EFTA, so I'm not sure kind of what that looks like. And so some of the stuff actually
It's kind of
Sean.
I thought EFTA was a non-event there because they just kind of basically folded. And so then it just kind of turned into, if you got a mountain bike race, you put it on. And then another thing I saw as a promoter was, my race is the same every year, and I'd have to do the paperwork every year. So as soon as I went unsanctioned, I didn't have to do any paperwork anymore. And, it doesn't take that long to fill out a permit request, but it's like doing your taxes. Nobody likes to do it. And so those are some of the incentives that smaller races go for unsanctioned, because then you don't have to ask permission anymore. And you're not really asking permission for EFTA to have a race unless you're a new race. If you're an old race, they pretty much see you doing the same thing year after year, and you're in.
So actually the part about them folding, does that mean they still offer event insurance, or is it?
No, if last I knew, they're just all done. They folded up and they said, but maybe I'm wrong. That was the last Facebook post that I saw. So I don't think there's any series, and I don't think they're offering any kind of licensing or anything.
That's not
Interesting.
what I was told, but it's possible that I didn't fully understand what I was told. Sounds like they're reorganizing, and they are trying to get a series of events together. So I guess it'd be good to clarify. It's possible that I didn't fully understand. So
I don't know either.
the one thing I would say about if we, let's say EFTA is operating like it has, thanks for that, Mike. I see your message in there. One of the things that was well explained to me at certain USA Cycling meetings that I was at, that I think might be helpful for you to think about, Brian, it's, we don't want to think of ourselves as sort of competing with EFTA, right? Like that's ideally not how we want it to go. But on the other hand, any race that goes with EFTA over USA Cycling is work that we're not getting, sanctioning that we're not getting. It's money that doesn't come into USA Cycling that benefits all of us who are committed to NIBRA and USA Cycling. People think that it's a comparable insurance product. And I know for myself as an organizer, I don't want to buy my insurance from anyone but USA Cycling. There's no release form that I trust more. There are no, the backup that I want, the protection that I want, the officials that I want, all that comes from USA Cycling. And sometimes I think it's helpful to be able to say to organizers, hey, what's your insurance? What's your policy look like? Can you show me your policy? Do you even have a copy of your policy? And
Right.
can you compare it to the policy that you're getting from USA Cycling? It almost never compares. And especially in the case of gravel, I think this is really critical when you're trying to convince gravel events to come over to USA Cycling. There are so many wild insurance policies out there that they're buying that in some cases don't even cover bike races. They don't even
they
realize
exclude them specifically.
Yeah, it's a wild west out there for so many of those organizers. And like, I don't know how much like direct, I don't assume that you have time to like chase events in this way. And I don't know anybody who really does, that USA Cycling even does, but that's the thing that I always want to say to them, even as participants who are trying to decide if they're entering, like, are you sure you're covered? Are you sure there's insurance at this event? Even if, so I don't know what, it's just something that I guess to think about. There isn't an action tied to that necessarily, but like, I just don't necessarily trust everybody else's insurance.
Yep, for sure. And I think it's something that's a song that we've sung for a while. And I think it rings true with stuff, with accidents happening in a bunch of different, in mountain bike, also on gravel and that sort of stuff, that promoters don't necessarily realize it's a problem until it happens to them. So it's something to consider. I mean, it's like with any insurance, you're kind of taking a risk not having it for certain benefits. And I agree with that, with USA Cycling being tried and true and in their insurance and all that stuff, for sure. So I appreciate that sentiment. And so like looking at, like, we're definitely off topic, but this is good to kind of discuss some of it and hear some feedback specifically on mountain biking and how we can help that community in New England, as well as like Trish as well, and how we can work together in doing that at a national level and what kind of that might look like, especially in our area. So I'd love to chat with you a little bit more about that. Looking at some of the trends, it's like cross with that blue line there. The sanctioning was slightly down from 2021, but similar to 2018, it still remains as about like 80% of the overall entries for anything that's listed on there. Mountain biking and gravel sort of follow those trends at the bottom there, mountain bike being the orange line, and it continues to rise actually with popularity in terms of overall sanctioning, but it's still kind of the small part of that pie. Looking at like about 20% of the overall entries on Bike Reg in New England are USA Cycling sanctioned events, are in USA Cycling sanctioned events. Same with the wrecking Bondo and gravel line, which is that gray line there. Notable thing that's notable is it's definitely, these disciplines tend to sort of follow some of the stuff that we're talking about with the past history of like anti-establishment storyline, which definitely has its own place and kind of like the fun and the excitement and all that sort of stuff. But we might see some of these trends change a little bit as people decide to sanction with USA Cycling for their insurance, for that sort of stuff. And like one of the arguments of saying just like, hey, permit mountain biking with USA Cycling is like, it's not just about like giving money to this black hole. It does come back to directly affect the community and even potentially even you and your races if you apply for a grant through us, because that's where some of the funding comes from. And that's the majority of what allows us to provide that. So just like some thoughts to consider with that, but also something I mentioned earlier is it gives your racers the ability to earn mountain bike ranking points. And if that does move to the East Coast, even if it's not Killington, that's something people might be more interested in. So you might see a slight uptick in racers wanting to do that. Same with what happened with cyclocross this season. So something to consider for sure. This is something we tracked last year and continue to sort of track it. And it's interesting because the disappearing 20-something bike racer is slightly rising from last year. And so there may be less disappearing and potentially in some ways flat from where it had been in 2019 and 2018. So wondering if maybe you guys can read some of the stats there. You saw road was down overall, and these stats are from the overall 2010 to 2022. So it's a big gap, and we know those trends are just sort of downwards in general, ever so slightly, but starting to come back up, which is interesting because this was a market segment we kind of assumed and expected to just kind of continue to decline and go away. And we mentioned something about it last year, kind of treating these people, but like finding a way to incentivize 20 to 29-year-olds to race in it. So you got to wonder like if maybe they're starting to like find more money somehow. They're finding a way to make it work. I don't know if anyone's noticed this in their area, but have you've seen any successful trends with like age-based pricing, or notice a trend at like say your training races or something like that of more 20 to 29-year-olds participating? Anyone chime in there? I certainly noticed that like a steady group at some of our CCAP races within cyclocross and within road of that group, and the college kids coming out and participating in a little bit more. And I see Alan hopped on here. I don't know if he's still on here. It has any insight from ECC stuff. Alan, are you on here? Maybe Ben, I saw you on mute.
Yeah,
How
I could
did it-
also speak to this. I think I might be one of the only 20 somethings on here. Tell me if I'm wrong. But
And me too.
yeah, there you go. I don't know. I feel strongly that there should maybe be more of a pricing bracket for U23 racers. In a lot of races, I think that would be pretty helpful. Rather than just junior racers coming out of college. Yeah, I think the pricing and inflation and in general costs of racing is really difficult for many racers to. I mean, I think the general trend in the last year of an uptick in 20-somethings is probably just because of general increase in interest in cycling in general. So I think that can probably pretty easily explain that. But yeah, I think it's
Maybe some more of the social media based stuff. People
yeah.
like cycling becomes more popular on like Instagram and TikTok and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. But again, I would just say it's a pricing thing. I mean, for me personally, like I've pretty much stopped racing just because it's costly. It's just way too pricey.
For sure, it does add up, and maybe there's a way to do that without necessarily having to complicate things too much and offering a period of like a discount code or something that you can set up. I mean, if you use Bike Reg, it's pretty easy to set those up, and doing that to say like, hey, this is college sign up week or something along those lines to try to get that 20 to 29-year-old, even if it's not college kids, but it's just that like under 30 sort of mentality, like of marketing your event to be able to have a period for them to register and kind of uptick that a little bit and just get more people in general. And maybe if it's only a few bucks off, it would be surprised at how much that goes a long way. So yeah, and then speaking of inflation, it didn't want to do a full slide on that because I'm not an economist, but there's definitely continued to see inflation. I think it was like 6.5% inflation last year. So that relates to some of the rising costs for promoters as well. And certain stuff is going up, I know as well. So something to consider with your entry fees, and maybe not making it too crazy on racers, because we know how bike racers are and how they react to pricing increases, especially with like competitive events that aren't necessarily typical gravel fondo style things, but like subtle increases might help you break your bank, and I think people would be understanding. So something to consider there. And another trend is the juniors. We tracked this last year and I wanted to do it again this year. So overall percentages are slightly down, actually. This is interesting. Slightly down over the past year, and that's just over the past year. Overall, they've been continuing to rise. And even if you look at the numbers from 2018 and 2019, they've still rise. So there's like, I think a residual effect there from COVID and people being forced outdoors to want to ride their bikes. And we are seeing some of that go back down with that big boom in 2021 of people finally realizing they can go outside, but organized sports might not necessarily have been a thing. Or they were to like the hardcore participants, but people that did pick up those outdoor events continue to do it, and we see that drop off. But I wouldn't imagine too much more attrition there. I think it should stay relatively the same, but it's tough to forecast. And cyclocross has been.
What's that odd
sorry.
bump in cyclocross? Is that just due to the skewing of statistics because so few riders were racing and the few events that happened were juniors, so they skewed the numbers so high?
Yeah,
in
that was because
2020?
the only races that happened in 2020 were cyclocross races in Connecticut with the CCAP. So we had all of our juniors come out
Okay,
to that. So
okay.
yep. So that's that sort of thing going on there.
Hey, back real quick, just real quick, back to the racing getting so expensive. I mean, like, so insurance keeps going up, the cost per rider, the cost of putting on the event, the fixed cost per rider goes up, stuff you cannot control. So what do riders expect? What can riders be willing to give up on that are the non-necessary, non-fixed costs? The last rider wants, detailed photo finishing, and, you spend almost as much on timing services and cameras and all that kind of stuff than you can spend on a good chunk of your officials. And for a small race like a credit and integrate, like one way to cut costs would be to say, hey, we're gonna tell you who's in first, second, and third, and rest of you, we're not going to give you your time. Just
So
way to do it.
That's interesting. And I would challenge that a little bit, because I don't think it's a good idea to take away from timing. And I know timing expense is a big one, but I think people, especially in this day and age where you have Strava that ranks you and you can tell if you're in 562nd place or like 330th or like so on and so forth, or first or second or third. Having that, and I've gotten feedback on that, even in some of like training races, people love to see that. And it is a big expense, but I don't know. I mean, aside from like totally eliminating timing and just like hand scoring, I don't think a timing service will change their price if you're like, hey, you only need to score top 10 or versus just scoring the whole thing, because they're already there, they're already set up and doing that. And I think that's valuable for a lot of people, and like not even just the current participants, but going along that line of what I was mentioning earlier about the mullet mentality 5K marathon style thing is like, people want to know how they did. They want to see their name on the results sheet. They paid for it. They feel like it's a part of it. I think that's like doing that it has its setting, maybe in a really low to barrier training race where it's like $10-$20 entry fee, that sort of thing. People can kind of understand that.
No, I mean, I get that. And what I wasn't suggesting that didn't add value. My question is to listen to complaints about cost and then realize I have to charge a certain amount to make a race break even, right?
Of course.
And so the cost is the cost is the cost. There's only, what are we supposed to do about it? But you don't want to give up the bells and whistles. They're paying a lot of money for these grand fondos. They're paying a fair amount of money for these 5Ks, right?
Right. Maybe, and then this is kind of spitballing here, but something is like, unless your race has like a very large cash prize, like eliminating cash prizes, I don't think is the end of the world. Like I don't really know of anyone that's making that's making a pure living off of like $125 prize check. I think some people might make an argument that they want that. I would be interesting to hear what other people think, but I don't think that's going to break the bank. I don't think it's going to stop people. Like,
there's certain people I know who would scream if we tried to eliminate cash prizes, but I think that would be a great thing to get rid of in the small races.
I think if you replace it with,
you're not there to make a living on it, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of actually, Ben, that's great. How did the event run? Like, what was the like prize structure? Was there anything along those? Did they like offer any prize money? Was it like medals? Because I know one thing that like, people can appreciate for sure is like something that's cool and memorable. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this super expensive, crazy thing. Cash is obviously not memorable. You might remember, hey, you won 125 bucks at Vinegar one year or whatever. But if you have something like a medal or a cool plaque or something that's customizable to the event that you might be able to order in bulk and use sort of year after year, you might be able to do it. And actually,
Yeah, John Harris made little prizes just out of wood and some gears from a bike shop and stuff like that. He gave away totally just handmade trophies that he made that cost him next to nothing.
Yep, exactly. That sort of thing I think people can appreciate. And Adam, I think we like in general, people have agreed about that. But what about even getting rid of it for elites when it's only like a total of $250 prize pool? Like, how do you think people would respond to that? Just curious. Like, I'm not saying everyone should do this. Just
Yeah, I think this is worth a voice response. I see us in this really weird spot right now where we're rebuilding grassroots cycling, and I'm thinking specifically about road cycling right now, but cross as well. And this is like my 36th or so year racing, and it really feels similar in a lot of ways to what it was like when I started, where maybe the only difference is the entry fees were obviously a lot cheaper then, but costs of putting a race on were also cheaper. So it's hard to compare. But the key is we didn't go to the races for the prize lists, and even the small local grassroots races were meaningful. They felt important. People cared about them, and they didn't go for the prize money. So I do agree that if your prize list for the elites is $250, then it's keep the $250. It's not significant in any way that's encouraging anyone to go. But on the other side, I also think like we've been racing for the same $1,000 for 30 years, right? Like the prize lists haven't changed since I started racing bikes. Even in the big races, $10,000 was a big pro 1-2 prize, like the Mayor's Cup, the Wheat Thins races. It was $10,000. We've been racing for $10,000 for 30 years. That hasn't changed. So I sort of would encourage.
it's gone down.
It's really interesting. But they're still kind of benchmarks in a way for me, where if I notice a local race has $1,000 in prize money for the Pro 1-2 race, maybe that's nostalgia for me or something, but I notice and I think, oh, this race is trying to do a thing. They're sort of trying to reach a certain level and say, we're trying to be at least a little bit serious. Now, no one's making a living racing $1,000 local criteriums or anything, but it does sort of send a signal that, hey, we're trying to at least be a platform here to kind of like take it a little more seriously, whatever. So what's the minimum where it becomes worth it that people notice and want to come because of prize money? There's a lot of debate about that. For me, it's $1,000 is what gets my attention. But I also know that I've seen organizers give big prize lists to encourage turnout and fail miserably for that. That it doesn't always drive turnout. So it's mostly about how you want to be perceived, I think. So I don't know if that's
That's
helpful,
fair.
but
I mean, no, for sure. I think like kind of like summarizing some of this is like, depending on what you want to do for your event and what it's looked like in the past, like if you can afford a cash prize, it might be worth doing that, but it's not necessarily a must. And I think it just kind of depends on the history of your race and what you're looking to do with it. And there might be other ways that would encourage more people to come. And even talking about some of the stuff, like we're not talking about juniors so much anymore, but as the juniors should, for clarity, probably never receive cash. I think that's actually a rule. It shouldn't receive cash. And it's not necessarily instilling
That's correct.
good value. So don't do that. But yeah, it's all dependent on what you want to do. Other ways, I'm curious, does anyone have any other ways to cut costs? One of my like obvious ones is finding, and this is tough, this is hard, but finding a venue that doesn't necessarily require a ton of police presence, unless your event can sort of justify paying for that either through like potential waivers from the town or sponsorship from the town. sponsors to cover that, or if your entry fees are at a certain thing. So all stuff to think about. Does anyone have any other ways to cut costs that they found successful?
I would veto that. I think that location-based costs specifically can definitely add up. I mean, there's also the question that, like, I mean, increasing your revenue is maybe just as much of a question, and participation revenue is just as much of a question as reducing costs. So I mean, I know that's all that we're talking about right now, but yeah, check.
Yep.
I
For sure.
I wanted to hop in quickly here, if I can. I put that comment in the chat about a ski race today, just because I feel like, and I'm really talking from a cyclocross perspective, is I feel like there's an expectation of what a race quote should cost, and I feel like there's almost a fear to raise that entry, and prices for everyone are going up. And I think there is an argument to be made to make entries for juniors and U23s more affordable. But I don't think most people are going to not come to a bike race because the entry fee is $45 instead of $35. But myself included, there's sort of this fear to do so because of that, I think, expectation of people. Whereas if you look at other sports, entry fees for events that are often just as short as a cyclocross race are quite a bit higher. And over at Craftsbury today, there was professional timing, and there was a food truck, and you got a meal voucher, and that's, I wasn't up in the front, so I don't know what they pay out or what the prices are, but it's I almost feel like there's an element of being stuck in what an entry fee should cost.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. Well, not trying to like gouge people and all that sort of stuff. There's the fear of even raising it, like $4 or $5 might result in this huge thing. And I think talking, like, I'm a huge advocate for, like, we know that like the trend of bike races continues to be this like masters group that is just like sort of aging up and moving up as the bottom sort of narrows out. And so Tony kind of actually mentioned something in there, but like considering for certain adults who have that like extra disposable income and that sort of stuff, raising the price a little bit to subsidize some of that stuff and the extra costs might be a way to do it. I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, and I know there'd be pushback on that as well, but maybe overall raising some of them and considering how to do that. One thing, and we can actually continue this conversation on in a little bit. One thing I want to mention here is, so like if you look at this graph here and you see like the road event and the rec fondo gravel categories are still like mostly flat, and it might be worth looking into some more like junior and U23 categories that aren't necessarily one. I know for the juniors it's tough to pair them with adults. Like I know it's easy for, and we run into the never ending issue of like daylight and costs and all that stuff, and extending the schedule versus keeping it short and having to combine categories, but trying to keep them separate from like the category 5s. So the beginner racers, like no junior wants to race with a large scary adult. Likewise, I know some adults have frustrations with like the juniors going around. They think they're sort of just in the way, and that might be a way to kind of alleviate some of that and potentially grow that percentage of entries and riders under 20 in those fields. And also, like, more specifically towards gravel, is offering like a shorter distance might help. I know a ton of juniors personally that are like intimidated by this idea of like going out for a 3 or 4 hour gravel race that's 60 to 80 miles sort of thing. And that, and if that's what your event's for, that's good. Like no worries there. Totally get it. Everyone's entitled to just like sort of put on an event that they want to do. But if you're looking for more juniors and more people to bring into the sport, this would definitely help, like direct feedback of that. And so something to consider, for sure. So actually, I see the chat is going on here. Cool, some good stuff on prize list though, to definitely consider that. Jeff, that's a good, that's funny that the juniors end up sorting themselves out by actually racing faster than the Cat 4s. And this is a good point too. Like, it's, some people typically consider like, hey, let's put the juniors with the smallest field that we have, right? Like, we're gonna combine the two with the smallest, because that doesn't make sense. Like, you're looking at the overall number of people on course at the same time, it tends to work out. But maybe consider doing that with like with similar ability levels, rather than just like the smallest field, and unless it's going to create a problem, but that might help the juniors progress as well as the adults progress there. Like, the race against more nimble, like, fast juniors that are like more tech savvy on bikes and have this technical ability that's insane, that might push them to kind of grow. So something to consider there, except the one exception I would say is like, don't ever put like a 9 to 12 junior category with like the Cat 4s for men. That might just totally different thing. And that's specifically thinking like cyclocross and that sort of stuff, but it can translate over into some of the other things. But having a separate junior category at your gravel event might help with that. All right, so I do want to like keep on moving to the recap here, so we do have some time for some questions and open discussion at the end. So events that happened in 2022 overall had roughly about 90% of their 2019 turnout and 95%. The calendar is stabilizing, which is great. It's awesome to kind of see it start to come back. Even events still going away, which is a bummer, but other events sort of filling in. And overall, it's starting to stabilize. We'll see how 2023 plays out. It's hard to forecast exactly what's going to happen. Mountain bike calendar, sanctioned and non-sanctioned, is mostly busy in April and May. Road calendar is, with a lot of dates transitioning, is kind of sliding heavier into May and June, which is, it seems to be like the old guard for, I guess, road racing kind of happens really throughout the whole year for most part, but it is pretty empty in July and August. So if you are thinking about putting on a new race or moving your date, maybe consider something around there and how we can fill in the schedule. I know you do see some dead spots, but it's a question of like, will people come out if those exist? Maybe. Don't know the exact answer to that. CX calendar is heavy in October. What about late November, December, potentially September? But again, submitting your dates before, looking at other events that have already posted and all that stuff, so you can avoid double days and all that conflict there. Recruit officials through your local clubs. That's important. We want to try to bolster the officials rankings to save promoters money as the other costs go up. And considering that, that's a good way to save money. And again, if they are club members, they might feel like they would want to donate their time to be able to work a race for you, so you don't necessarily have to pay an extra official. They might be there already, that sort of thing. They could work as an assistant judge or an assistant ref. Actually, Sean, can they work as a chief judge? Is it no chief positions? Just chief ref particularly?
So the real issue is with chief refs. Chief judges, we do allow that. We just have to make sure that we understand what's going on with the situation. But yeah, chief judge is okay. Chief referee is not. Chief judge we want to avoid if we can, but sometimes we have no choice. So we do allow that.
Yep, gotcha. So another reason to consider that is just potentially saving the cost there. So that would help, and then it would also make Sean and Elise's job a lot easier, and they've been a huge help for us. So let's support them.
Yeah,
And
one thing to point out on that, Brian, obviously it's also the qualification of that particular club official, right? Like, if your club official signs up, and becomes a C official, and your club event is the first event, they're not going to be the chief judge, right? They have to have experience as a chief judge before we would assign them as a chief judge. Or at least as an assistant judge in at least a couple of other events. So, there are some sort of, qualifications that come with that from an experience perspective. But
Yeah,
certainly
and
as an assistant judge or an assistant referee, absolutely, we're happy to figure that out.
Great. And as someone's part of that experience building stuff, we can talk about if promoters find this as a benefit and clubs find this as a benefit, like please reach out to us and tell us this. But like there's been other LAs and in discussion around potentially like paying what a normal official would get as an apprentice. So if they are apprentice to there and that's building that experience for them to be able to do it, if there's enough interest in that, we'd be totally willing to pay for that sort of thing. But yeah, recruit officials through your local clubs and permit your mountain bike races USA Cycling. Obviously know the insurance works well. It helps the racers out by giving them ranking points. And the more mountain bike races in USA Cycling that sorry, I'm getting distracted by chat. More mountain bike races USA Cycling allows for more grants, and we can develop grants specifically around mountain bike racing. So worth considering that. And the junior and 20-something racers are definitely a market segment you want to continue to sort of cater to as best you can. We're trying to grow the base of the sport in a similar way with recruiting officials, and the low cost is definitely helpful, especially for the juniors and their families. Like, as you know, being a family is definitely tough to get to do it for. So offering some incentives around that, and whether that's just general lower cost for them, or that sort of stuff, potentially free, anything you can do to kind of help it out. Unfortunately, the event is going to cost more than last year again. So considering overall potential price raises, do whatever you feel is comfortable. Don't go too crazy, do some research and see what other sports are charging. And we know that some of the gravel rides and the recreational rides and the fondos and all that sort of stuff are charging what would be like an obscene amount to people would perceive as an obscene amount to participate in certain things. So maybe, and it doesn't mean just raise your prices and be like, well, other people do it, but considering kind of why people are willing to pay that sort of thing. And it's about the experience for sure. So everyone should be trying to figure out how to continue to get juniors to race in college and college students to join their local club after college. This is the general sort of push for that. And junior clubs should be considering having resources for their kids to show them what colleges that offer cycling programs, and that it is a real opportunity to be able to ride your bike for a collegiate team. And that could be varsity, that could be just a club team. There's different stuff out there. Some people do offer scholarships, while others might just offer like that ability to be that community and being a part of that. And finally, renew your NEBRA memberships. Voting is coming up. If you want to be on the NEBRA board and help influence some of this, and you have good ideas on how to help bike racing in New England, like please apply. We do have 2 open spots, and Krista Hahn is running for re-election. So there is 3 spots that need to be filled all together. So please submit your board statement and email that to board@nebra.us. We'll send that out in a follow-up email. Yes, board members do need to be 18 for sure. They should absolutely be an adult. We would consider some sort of something around that, but they can't be an official board member unless they're 18, and it could be free. So if you put on a USA Cycling race in the last year, it is free. Otherwise it's just $25, but that does allow you access to other grants and funding and that sort of stuff. So renew your memberships, and that's that for the recap. And I do want to open it up to some Q&A and open discussion. We've got about like 10 minutes here. We could go through some thing if anyone has anything particular they'd like to talk about.
Just curious, would you be able to send out these slides to the group afterwards?
Absolutely. Yep. For sure. I'll also be sending out a recording of this as well. But we can send out the slides so you don't have to sit through a 2-hour Zoom meeting recording. Anyone else here?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's ever any interest in kind of like breaking NEBRA down into more regional groups of promoters. I know what promoters face in Western Mass dealing with like New York races versus Boston-based promoters is a lot different. And I'm just wondering if there would be any interest in kind of creating regional working groups, or yeah, just groups to discuss.
I'd agree with that, and I'd support the idea of pairing up races and sort of support sort of sharing group sort of best practices by also race size and demographic or type. Like obviously, like if it's a big crit or a big cyclocross race, you know, to open the books and have a completely open discussion about best practices between different races could be big. Sometimes people keep some things close to their chest, or people think that they do, but they'd be absolutely willing to talk about it, and you could really learn a lot from each other.
Interesting, like potentially doing it in terms of sizes and location is beneficial. I like the best practices idea. Ben, like, what are some of the challenges that you think would benefit from that sort of thing? I'm just curious. I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I guess coordinating dates with kind of other local races, you don't get the double scheduling, which is helpful. Kind of what I believe Aiden was just mentioning too, though, is yeah, more discussion, coordinating overall with sponsors for regional promoters could be helpful, and just figuring out like what fits best in the calendar better.
Right, not a bad idea, and honestly, just we can totally put out like a survey and see the general interest, and then if there's not enough to do like regional ones, we could do like a promoters working group. But also remember too, like some of the stuff, if you ever have any questions, like feel free to reach out directly to us with that stuff. But yeah, we can totally talk about that as a board. Absolutely,
I guess just
good idea.
To follow up on that, I guess, yeah, if NEBRA could create kind of like communication channels, I don't know what that would look like, Slack groups or Google groups. Not that any of us probably want another thing to try to follow, but maybe that would be helpful to check.
Yeah, are you part of the promoters Google group? I think you are, right? It's been somewhat quiet over the last year or two. Besides general calendar, their updates. Is there actually stuff that you think would be helpful for people? Like, we don't want to spam people too much, but I'm inclined to start setting up the ideas of like of just general updates and improvements and stuff like that. But are you part of that group?
Yeah, I believe I am, but I think just breaking it down into more kind of general groups into kind of event size or type of event or region makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Josh, as you see, Chris answered that the cyclocross calendar does go out after the road one is finalized, which will help get that nailed down. But in the past, historically, that's been around June. But I think a little bit earlier might be useful in some way. I usually collect them around May or so. But feel free to submit your dates too for cyclocross by emailing calendar@nebra.us if you already know them. You kind of hit a weird conflict there where some people do know and then others just have no idea.
Brian, wondering, is there any sort of helpline that, for want of another term, that road race directors reach out to before races get cancelled off the calendar, that we can kind of put it out there, what's killing it, that the whole community might be that's on here might be able to help with, type of thing? Not to put anyone on the spot, but I see Hilltowns is cancelled for this year. You know, if a race like that was put out that, hey, they need help, whether it's financial, they need volunteers, it didn't get enough racers last year, can we all help promote this, publicize it? Is there some kind of helpline that stops that before it gets cancelled?
So no, there isn't currently something. There is not something specifically dedicated to that. There's always the Neighbor Promoters Group, which like feel free to email and ask questions as long as we're not like spamming it too much because there's a lot of people on there. Perhaps it would be worth noting, like if your race is potentially going to cancel, like reach out directly to the board and to Nibra at USA Cycling, or sorry, Nibra board at Nibra.us to like address those issues and ask if there's any way that we can help. Is like that's exactly what we're here for, is trying to just help bike racing happen. And if that means yours might not happen, like feel free to reach out and we'll see what we can try to figure out.
I see Chris just answered that Hilltowns is cancelled forever. Why is that, Chris, if you don't mind sharing? What is it that's
Well,
killing?
it's probably best to be an offline conversation, but I'll just simply say the club decided to no longer support the race.
Gotcha.
So that's that. Yeah, if you want to talk about it in detail, if you're interested in stepping up and taking it over, definitely contact me offline.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep, great point, Matt. Most races do fold from a lack of participation because that usually translates over to some sort of lack of income. And then there's some outside factors to it, but that's a good point. All right. So we are officially at time. Does anyone have any last minute things worth discussing? And last quick questions. I don't know if I want to do that to everybody. If you do have anything else, like feel free to just reach out to board at Neighbor.us again, and send your board candidate statements there as well. But if you do have any questions that do ever come up, like feel free to reach out to us, or as well as if they are related to USA Cycling, Trish has put an email in there, as well as Chuck has, and so has Sean. So Sean, you about to say something?
Yeah, just one follow up. There was some back and forth on the juniors and the prizes and stuff like that. So the juniors are eligible for monetary prize monies unless they're in a novice only race. Okay, so novice only races are not eligible for monetary or anything of commercial value. That's the rule 1H11. Youth riders, which is what it also says as part of that, youth riders are 8 and under. So if a 12-year-old is in a Cat 4 race, yes, they can win the prize money. But if the 12-year-old is in a novice only race, a Cat 5 only race, then nobody is eligible for monetary in those races. Hope that clarifies. Thanks.
So is there any rule of stipulation around, like, I don't think it's a good practice to do, but like if you had a junior category offering prize list for that, you can't do that, right? So if it was a junior only category is what I'm saying.
You can, there is no rule against that, as long as it's not a novice only junior race.
Interesting. Interesting. I did not know that.
Yep.
How
Cool.
many,
Well,
but so I guess even if all the juniors only have Cat 5, sorry, I can't get used to not saying Cat 5.
Novice Cat
But
5. We all know what you mean, Mitch. Go for it.
If the juniors all have novice licenses,
then it's a novice only race.
Well, no. So most juniors will have novice. So this is the key point. If the event is not restricted to novice only, but a novice wins, can they still get a cash prize?
My interpretation is yes. I'm going to ask Trish to just validate that for us if she could.
Yes,
Okay.
I agree.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So you would basically not restrict your junior event to novice only, even though 99% of them are going to have novice licenses. Not a lot of them have higher licenses in my small events in my experience.
Mhm.
So yeah, you could still give a little bit of prize money. But what I've done with the juniors is given them like, $10 entry fee, or
Sure.
like a nominal entry fee. So I'm not going to throw a prize list at them, right? They want,
Right.
Yeah.
they're desperate for any racing experience. The prize money is not going to bring them there, right?
Correct.
Right. Yep.
And really the question is, something like a much bigger event like the stage races, right? Of course, that is, you know, an incentive for some of the juniors is to be able to win some money, and they're eligible for
Right.
that there.
But those are some pretty damn serious juniors too.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
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 All right, great. Well, thanks everyone. Appreciate you taking your time out of your Sunday. Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Sean. Thank you all for just joining us. I really appreciate it and appreciate you guys. And we'll follow up with sending out a link to the video as well as the slides. Expect that sometime in the next week or so.
Great. Thanks for doing it all, Brian. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you, everyone.